Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us, and I hope everybody's doing well today. I am Trevin Edgeworth. I'm the Red Team Director at Bishop Fox, and today we get to talk about my favorite subject, which is red teaming. This webcast is titled Red Teaming, Is Your Security Program Ready? And we're specifically going to be helping you to gain some insights to try to answer that question for you as to whether that's a wise choice for you at this point in time versus other alternative offensive security approaches, as well as what are some things that you can do to be best prepared so that you can get the most value possible of that experience that you can, so that it can be a really positive outcome for you and lead to great things for you. So if you look to the right of the page of the webcast, you'll see a couple of features on that side for you to chat and ask questions. You're welcome to use audience chat. That is not anonymous, so we'll know who you are and what you type there. And then if you have any questions that I can address, there is a Q&A function as well. The QA function is anonymous. If you're worried about being judged from your question, it wouldn't be by me, but I can't promise for your peers on this call. But I will leave time at the end of this presentation to kind of go through those and answer as many of those as I can. So plan for today, we're going to be able to give you an overview of what red teaming is and why we do it, some of the top use cases, why we do it, and why some of our customers come to us to do that for them. I'll talk through some of the core differences between red teaming and pen testing, and some key factors around whether red teaming is a great choice for you right now based on certain factors, certain prerequisites of your existing security program. And then one of my favorite parts of my job is that I get to work with companies of all different shapes and sizes across all different industries, all levels of security maturity. And I often get the question, what does good offensive security rigor look like and coverage? Like, where should we start? What are the most important things to start with, and what are the most mature security organizations doing around pen testing and red teaming and things? And we just happen to be, as a firm, really, really well situated to be able to observe those things across so many different companies and industries. So I'm going to give you some perspectives of what I see across our customer base and what they're doing in terms of how often and the types of things that they're doing. And then we're going to get into things you can do and questions you can answer in advance of asking for a red team, so that you'll be ready for that. Let's see. And then there's often questions around, should we build our own internal red team, or should we rely on offensive security firms, third-party providers, and the like? There's a lot to think about on both sides, pros and cons and things. And I'm going to share some insights there, and then I'm going to highlight for you the 5 most common areas where customers' target environments make mistakes that lead to red team or even worse, real attacker success in the case of a breach scenario. So in that way, we're kind of giving you the answers to the test in advance. So again, I'm Trevin Edgeworth. I'm Red Team Director at Bishop Fox, and I have been in security for almost 2.5 decades now. I actually started my career in IT as a sysadmin. I did that all throughout much of my college for a biotech startup company in Arizona. And then on graduating, they asked me to oversee not just their small IT department, but also all of their product software development. So cross-functionally, I had embedded Linux developers that were writing firmware and OS code. I had scientific programmers that were writing really high-level logic for these glucose measurement devices that we were building for diabetics. And then, so I'm here as a recent college graduate with my bachelor's, and I've got like these silver-haired Linux developers and PhD chemists and algorithm developers and DBAs, and so to me it was just kind of like being thrown right into the fire. But I learned a whole lot from it, and it was a difficult but also very high growth start to my career. Well, shortly after graduation, I'm going into work, with just a lot of things on my mind, things that I need to do. And for some reason, I didn't have any music, any talk radio, nothing on. I was just really, really deep in thought, I guess. And so I get into work and I start making the rounds looking for my friends and coworkers and people that I like to chat with. And nobody is where they usually are. In fact, the office is feeling like it's closed, barely any signs of life. Like, is this a holiday? Is this a day off? Or did I come in on a Sunday or something? So as I get closer to my office, I could hear a TV in the break room, which was odd because we didn't have a TV in the break room. I headed into that direction, and there gathered in that room were like 15 to 20 people huddled in this small room around a TV someone had brought in from home. And I looked over the shoulder of someone in the doorway, and there on the TV screen were these horrific video images of giant jet airlines plunging into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. And that moment in my life, that period of my life was a point where I made a career decision that I have never budged from, and I likely never will. Because in that moment, I saw these first responders, for the heroes that they are, the paramedics and the firemen and law enforcement and rescue workers and soldiers, people digging through rubble, as these true heroes that they were. And I decided that I was going to devote the rest of my career and professional life to protecting others in some way. But as I thought about it, I'm like, none of these career paths are for me. I'd probably be a terrible soldier. I'd be probably really bad at enforcement. I didn't have particular talents in any of those areas, but I was brought up around programming and tech and computers and all things related to technology. So that made it a very easy decision for me that I was going to protect people. I was going to protect organizations. I was going to protect critical infrastructure digitally. And I've never looked back from that. And what a journey it has been. I've been with a number of different financial institutions and software security companies whose mission and core vision is protecting people's digital lives and identities. And I've led a number of the CTI teams, threat hunting functions. I've been on the detection and response side of the world. I've done some forensics and tools deployment for security with like SEMs, log management platforms and things. But by far, the greatest focus in my career has been on the offensive side. It's been adversary emulation. It's been red teaming. I built red teams for a number of different companies. I've been a CISO. Some of you on this call are CISOs and security decision makers, and I have a very healthy respect for the role that you have as chief security champions within your organizations. And I really love to apply red teaming to help inform you as decision makers around your vital decisions that you are needing to make in order to protect your organizations. Early in my red teaming career, I got an unexpected message from an IT sysadmin, like what I had done previously in my same company, and they were based in Singapore. And they said, you don't know me, but I was read into by a CIO, by our CIO, to an operation that you ran about 9 months ago. And I lead a team that owns a very, very critical service for the company that deals with a really heavy amount of customer PII. And as I read through this red team report of yours that you guys did, it really terrified us and opened my eyes to all the things that are possible. So we kicked off a whole bunch of different sprints to undergo a full security review of this platform. And we found quite a few gaps that we had since hardened. And we would absolutely love it if the next time you do a red team operation, you could figure out a way to weave this into your red team attack narrative, to include this in your next exercise. We think we're ready for it. So bring it on. And so my initial thought was, wow, this red team report is kind of getting circulated out of, into all sorts of places here. And I was initially kind of disappointed, but then I thought, wow, here is a person I've never met, leading a group I didn't know existed and a platform I didn't know existed. And they just underwent a major cultural change, a fundamental security culture change, because of an effort that my team went through on another continent, in another country, right? It was one of the many experiences that I've had throughout my career in red teaming that really illustrated to me just how profoundly powerful red teaming can be if it's done correctly. So we've got a poll question here. I'm not sure if you guys can see that or not. Do I need to go to the next slide to do that? Yes. Okay. So before we get into this, we've got a poll question for you. Just trying to get a feel for who's on the call here. What is your level of experience with red teaming? So some of you may already be doing it and just want to learn a little bit more about it. Some of you are just zero, brand new to red teaming, some exposure. We'd love for you to answer that question, then I can kind of get a sense for, wow, we got some experts on here. So maybe I can turn the time over to you guys and you can share some knowledge as well. So really love these responses here. It looks like a good amount who has limited or extensive. So that's pretty good to see. Very cool. Nice. So we have a pretty good range that we're looking at here. Very nice. Nice little bell curve going on here with limited right in the middle there. So cool. Okay. So excellent. So we're going to talk about first defining red teaming, if we can get the slides back up here. But, red teaming, relatively newer concept in the private sector security in the grand scheme of things. And as such, it's often defined very differently by different people. I've gone into environments where they throw the term red team around and it's anything but. It's something very different. But this is a detailed definition of it. It's end to end. So it's not just one app or one database platform. It's not just an external network perimeter. It's not just a building or a group of people. It's inclusive of all the things, the full unrestricted attack surface potentially across technological, across physical, and across social domains. So it is a simulation of a scenario or emulation of one or more real world adversaries. And we do it in order to provide companies with solid insights as to how your comprehensive security program, your security controls collectively will stand up against real world attacks. And so as a CISO, I was called into in front of a board of directors who took very, very seriously, as did I, their stewardship and accountability over the company's full estate and the attack surface. And I was told to answer a number of questions, but namely a couple in particular. Are we buttoned up against ransomware and supply chain attacks? This happened right around when ransomware was hitting, around SolarWinds, around that, and it had scared a lot of executives, and boards were just starting to get really solid guidance around security and offensive security as well. So they were becoming wise to be able to ask a lot of these types of questions. So I had time to prepare this, and I thought through it from every possible angle, I guess. But so through patch rigor, what's our EDR coverage? What is our AppSec maturity like? How about our security awareness? How often are people clicking on our phishing exercises? And by the way, we're fully compliant to all the things. But at the end of that, it still felt partially unanswered, right? Until I told them, and on top of that, over the course of 2 months, that we ran ourselves through a full end-to-end ransomware and supply chain attack simulation that was based on the actual TTPs of current threat actors. And this is how the organization fared. This is how the controls stood up. Here is what worked. Here is what needs additional attention. And these are the work streams that are in place as a result of that. So very profound experience for me, and just seeing like the extent to which red teaming, better than any approach I've ever seen or been involved with, proves, right? So everything else is hypothetical and subjective to some extent, and hypothetical and subjective is way too prevalent in the security tradecraft. So I've literally been in a red team out brief from an operation where we've had up on the screen in front of technical folks and leaders a screenshot that showed successfully dumping a database table where a database architect in the room says, hold on, that's not possible because in my environment, that table isn't accessible by the user that you were using, right? So to me, it's like, I'm sorry, I beg to differ with you. there's the picture right there on the screen. We actually did it with that user. So how many times have assumptions or assertions from that DBA gone unchecked, in a room where there was no proof, right? Either we did it or we didn't on a red team. You can't argue with the proof usually. So red teaming, it cuts through all that subjective and it proves beautifully, giving CISOs, security decision makers, some very crystal clear, unadulterated ground truth to inform your different control strategies and budget strategies and things like that. So much simpler definition of red teaming. It is objective-based adversary emulation. Two parts to that. Number one, it's objective-based. So rather than starting with a scope, a network perimeter, we are starting with an attack objective. That's first and foremost. What is that attack objective? It's something like, can you delete a mortgage in our system? Can you gain access to all of the payment card information of all of our customers? Can you modify rewards points? Can you perform an unauthorized wire transfer? Can you get physical access to the C-suite floor of our company headquarters? Can you stop a train? Can you cut power to a factory, right? None of those were framed in an approach of us starting with a scope. Tell me all the things that are wrong with my environment, right? It is all objective based, and then the scope flows from that based on our attack graphing and things like that. And then the second part of that is adversary emulation, which means we, in the process of doing that and achieving that attack goal or goals, we will closely emulate the motivations, the capabilities, the intent, the tactics, techniques, and procedures of real-world adversaries that want to do that customer harm. So those two pieces are essentially the simplest definition I can come up with on what is red teaming, and we see how people stand up when we do that. But red teams help in a number of different ways. Number one, it gives you a very clear picture as to how your security program is doing around actual attack scenarios. It's that ground truth. And then we can actually be the blue team's sparring partner. So from a game theory perspective, if you're familiar with game theory, a real adversary versus your blue team is a true zero-sum game. They win, you lose. They lose, you win. It is a zero-sum game. But with red teams and blue teams, that is a non-zero sum game. So we are on the same team as the blue team, working through with them on that. So we're going to share afterwards everything that we possibly can to help you with that, because in the end, you win, we win, we win, you win, type of a thing. So, there's other ways you could get that sanity check of your controls environment, and that is by getting actually breached, but it's going to be a lot more expensive, a lot more painful, and an actual attacker is not going to come back on the back end and give you a very detailed report of everything they did along with recommendations. So I prefer red teams over breaches 10 out of 10. But to that earlier point, incorrect assumptions abound within security organizations. CISOs are often told we have 100% coverage of MFA across our entire external perimeter, right? Or it's impossible within our company, with the way our processes are, to accidentally publish an S3 bucket to the internet, unintentionally or intentionally. Or we have full coverage of EDR, and it catches literally everything bad, right? So Chris Gates from Robinhood's Red Team has used a term that I really like, and it's called being your in-house contrarians. And I really like that term, in-house contrarians. We can pressure test. We can show you the limitations of those types of assertions that maybe you're taking for granted or haven't been fully pressure tested there through these exercises. We have another poll. And I'm going to do that before I go to the next slide, so I don't give you any answers there. Interested to know, you're attending this call, you want to learn about red teaming, would love to learn a little bit more about your why. Okay, so why? What is driving interest in requirements for red teaming? Some options up here. I'm an executive with responsibility, accountability for cybersecurity. Our board C-suite is requiring one. I want to validate the efficacy of our security programs and our security posture. I want to prepare for potential ransomware attacks. It's a best practice that we want to follow. And then there's this giant other in there. So if your answer doesn't fit in the above ones, feel free. You can use the chat. I'm actually going to have a look at that real quick to make sure people. Hi, greetings. Welcome. Thanks for joining. All right. So just looking to see if there were any kind of Michigan, LA. Wow, that's awesome. Toronto, Windsor. Good stuff. I'm just making sure there was no questions in here. Are we going to be providing the slide deck afterwards? I think we are. And we're going to probably have a recording of this thing afterwards go out. Okay, I don't see any things here. But if you do have any things under other, feel free to chat in there as to why else you might be. There's a healthy percentage of people, a good quarter of you, who are for another reason, maybe just wanting to learn a little bit more about red teaming. Feel free to use that function there. But so typically, yeah, what's your other? But most of them are, I want to validate the efficacy of our security programs and our security controls. And then I'm an executive with responsibility, accountability for cybersecurity oversight. Awesome. Yeah, those are two of the most common ones. And as you'll see on this next slide here, these are typically the reasons why people come to us. So they have to for compliance. We've recently seen a new law in Europe, DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, which requires financial institutions doing business in Europe to undergo a number of different things, one of which is threat-led penetration testing. In other words, adversary emulation, right? It's called pen testing, but in this case, when you're leading with a threat and a threat actor and intelligence about them, you're getting into red team territory there. So red teaming meets that need really well. DORA also requires companies that produce and maintain critical services where a critical mass of banks use them. For example, cloud providers, cloud hosting providers, or network device manufacturers. So number of customers trying to meet those requirements there. I like breaking into stuff without getting caught. Hey, you're in the right place. I want my SOC to get better. Very cool. Another segment is asking for a team because their board or directors or C-suite, just like I was, is taking their accountability for their company security very seriously and wanting assurances that they would be resilient to that kind of an attack. And then a large number of our requests of people coming to us for red teams are coming from CISOs who are just like starting a new role and wanting a kind of a baseline check as to what they've gotten themselves into in terms of a security program, or alternatively, a long tenured CISO that after spending millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, a healthy amount of time and effort into building something, they want to take a step back and they want to find out, is it all working? Is it all working like I think it is, right? How I'm being told it is. What should my priorities as a CISO, as a leader be going forward? And red teams give you a great set of data points that kind of guide that important decision making. And there's just a lot of organizations concerned that they could be in the crosshairs for ransomware or some of these other types of attacks like supply chain and things that have been kind of tearing through different industries pretty indiscriminately. So, and that's never a good day for a company or a security organization. Ransomware just continues to evolve and adapt. It's a cat and mouse game. It's not going anywhere. They get better, we get better. They get better, we get better. And red teaming a ransomware simulation is a really, really excellent approach to stay ahead. So red teams, again, test your full environment, your full security program of controls, not just technical controls, but people and process controls. So two key areas of controls. Number one is preventive controls. When these attack activities occur, are they stopped or prevented from happening? Or alternatively, do you make the attacker's job more difficult that forces them to take more steps, to take noisier steps in the process, which would increase the likelihood of failure for the attacker? Or the second purpose here on the right is detective controls, right? So when they are performing that malicious activity, is it generating the right type of alert telemetry from security tools and systems? Does that telemetry reach your logging tier? Is it processed in a way that generates actual alerting that humans or in today's day, an AI SOC analyst now is able to look at and decide is worth looking at more deeply and investigating versus a false positive? And does that investigation go deep enough to result in a successful detection? I just named off like 4 or 5 things that have to go right on the detection chain for that to actually be a successful outcome and a successful detection. And so one of those links in that detection chain goes wrong and something's going to get missed. So we help with preventive and detective controls, and we give you a good litmus test as to, are you preventing the right things? Are you detecting the right things? So notice in my defining and talking about red teaming, I didn't emphasize vulnerabilities very much at all, or even say that word, I don't think, right? So there's a big reason for that, and that is that while red teams often do find and exploit vulnerabilities, it's not the primary goal. We're not going into your environment to see how many vulnerabilities we can find, right? Other approaches do that. It's really vulnerabilities are more of a secondary or tertiary thing to things like validation of the effectiveness of your security controls. So while red teams are designed to give freedom to pivot and maneuver through your attack surface, whether that's web applications or your cloud environment or social engineering, so humans, or Active Directory, or your physical facilities, OT environments, they do not comprehensively scan or look for vulnerabilities across that full environment. Okay, they only look for vulnerabilities when exploitation of said vulnerability is required in order to go from one link of the attack chain to the another one. So in other words, we look for the why of each stage first and exactly what we're trying to get to. And if exploiting a vulnerability is the optimal path for us to move ahead towards that crown jewel and to the next stage, then we'll look for vulnerabilities to exploit, right? But again, vulnerabilities are secondary. So we almost never will apply noisy, automated scanning techniques, like vulnerability scanning, for example. So from that standpoint, vulnerability assessment, vulnerability scanning, vulnerability management agents, that has the greatest breadth, as you can see on the left-hand side here, of offensive security testing. It's noisy, it's automated, it gives you a ton of insights on vulnerabilities that exist. Now, pen testing is a little bit more targeted, much more targeted, and it goes a little deeper because it validates things that are identified by maybe some automated scanning, some targeted scanning that they'll do there. And then red teaming will do it extremely carefully and usually very manually, as a threat actor would, with a very strong emphasis on stealth and only performing actions that are necessary for each step. So red team gets a great amount of depth, not a huge amount of breadth, although all scope is possible with a red team usually in being able to achieve those attack goals. And then on the right side is a cost per vulnerability. So red team, from a cost per vulnerability identified standpoint, is one of the most expensive vulnerability identification methods that are out there because it's not the main point. So pen testing and especially vuln assessment are way more cost effective if vulnerabilities are your top priority. So if validation of the effectiveness of your security program and controls is your goal, then red teaming, that's your huckleberry. So we had a customer, giant media company, their CISO 100% was bought into red teaming. They knew exactly what it was. They were familiar with it. They knew what they wanted. We lined up this engagement with them. But after signing that SAL, we ended up with a much more technical point of contact throughout the remainder of the exercise. And so that person had never had a red team done before. All their experience previously was with pen testing and vuln assessment. And as they looked at the report, they said, I don't want this big report. I just want a CSV of all the vulnerabilities with CVSS scores, and I'll plug that into our remediation platform along with our vuln scanning results there. And they said, this is it? Just a handful of vulnerabilities? I was expecting like hundreds of vulnerabilities here. So there was a disconnect because the CISO, who actually wanted us to do the deal, had a different view and understood red teaming versus the person that we were working with, who was more of a vuln type of person there. The disappointment by the POC was all just due to not understanding the strengths and purposes of each of the approaches there. So pretty easy to understand how vuln scanning and assessment differs from red teaming, but pen testing and red teaming often deserve some attention because there's some nuance there, but both are super valuable approaches. They just have different aims and purposes. A few weeks ago, I heard someone describe pen testing in terms of there being a city, your target organization being represented by like a full city, and that city might be a network perimeter or your PCI range or one or more web applications. And a pen test is going to be looking comprehensively for, number one, where are all the juicy looking things there, and what are the ways to get to those things, right? It's kind of really open-ended in terms of what vulnerabilities are and where do they allow me to go. So red teaming, alternatively, if we were to take that city example, it would be something like find any and all ways to steal the Mona Lisa from the city's museum. And in so doing, could we see what's happening and detect it and respond properly, right? It's more of a scenario, and how would we stand up against that? Or simulate different ways that a nation state would shut down power to the city. I don't care if it's in the power grid infrastructure, or tricking power company employees, or sneaking into power generation facilities with a fake EMP device or something. It's more of the scenario. Or show different ways you could eavesdrop on secret closed door meetings, private planning meetings at the city. So it's not about vulnerabilities. So that was red team compared to other kind of approaches for identifying vulnerable paths. But from a standpoint of services that are focused on process and detections, there's a few closely connected services that sometimes get confused, and these are tabletops, red teams, and purple teams. So a red team is, you're familiar with that by now. Tabletops are much more around like role play types of situations. It can either be technical or executive tabletop. We'll run you through a scenario with injects, and really the goal of that is to see how your decision makers in your company, your stakeholders within different areas, are responding to a hypothetical event scenario. And then purple teaming is much more like a practice. If a red team is like a scrimmage or a game day situation, your purple team is much more like, okay, we're going to, as a coach, we're going to work together with your players on basic blocking and tackling. When I do this, okay, I'm doing it right now. How do you respond? Okay, let's work on that a little bit, that technique there. So it's very collaborative. It's very much working together with your purple team to make sure that they're ready and ready for when they have to go up against that true heavyweight fighter in the ring that is the real threat actor there. Okay, so what kind of prerequisites, or where do you need to be from a security maturity standpoint for a red team to really be a good use of your time, your money, your efforts there? We've had red team engagements where our customer POC had way too high of an opinion of their defenses. I think they were told a lot of things by their team that were not based on facts. So they tell us things like, hey, you're probably going to get detected in your first day or two, so we're going to plan to pivot to a white box type of a thing after day 3 or whatever. And so we get started on that, and after 2 days, we not only had complete control of their domain, but full access to customer PII, all of the other trophy targets, and 0 detections along the process. So in fact, my team thought, hey, for this customer, if they want something again the next time, we'd recommend maybe they do more of a network pen test to kind of tease out some of the more fundamental areas that were a little bit more broken inside. So again, from the standpoint of red teams can pressure test assumptions, very valuable, right? Because the CISO realized, okay, different than what I thought. That was a very different outcome, and they kind of had a better view of what the elephant really looked like. But from an actionable intelligence standpoint about remediations and things, we ended up just producing a lot that they needed to work on, which might be good if they can consume it all, but you got to kind of know where you are in the process to where it's a good decision for you. So how do you know if you're ready? Number one, I would look at your security and risk management culture. If you have a very strong security and risk management culture within your organization, what's your leadership support like around security matters? Is security deprioritized way below other priorities? What does your organization do when they learn that there's an exposure or vulnerability that'll take some time and effort to fix that, right? Do they fix it without question? Do they go through cost benefit? Do they drag their heels? Do they say, we'll get to it when we can? Do employees generally have strong security consciousness around things? That culture will say a lot about your readiness for a red team. And then these other, red teams typically produce findings in kind of 3 key buckets. Okay, you've got your vulnerabilities that I mentioned, right? That's going to have a CVE. It's going to be fixed through either a patch or a configuration change or something like that. And then you've got another class of things that we find, and that is more detection gaps. These aren't going to have a CVE because it's not a vulnerability. It's more of a detection gap. It's more of something that wasn't seen, observed, or responded to. So it's more likely to have more like a MITRE TID, a threat, or a tactic or a technique from the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So those are normally going to be triaged through a SOC or maybe your content, person for your SEM. But that's a very different kind of process for handling those. And then more often than not, in fact, red teams will produce findings and observations that are much more thematic and big rock in nature, that aren't the types of things that are going to be fixed overnight with a detection or a patch. This is going to require architecting or procuring a whole new process or service. These are things like we just learned we have 0 network segmentation in our network, or we don't have an enterprise wide secure password management standard, or people don't use it. And those kinds of things are going to have a very long tail of remediation. They're going to be tracked more as a global risk by your GRC teams. It's not going to have a CVE. It's going to be, we are missing this key control area. So in order to know that you're mature, those next 3 check marks there are related to those 3 that I mentioned. Do you have a vulnerability management program that can take the vuln findings? Do you have a SOC that can action your detection logic related findings? And do you have a GRC function that can track the more thematic, chronic, big rock, control gap types of findings to completion? And then the last thing I would look at, it's great to see kind of a decent history of offensive security rigor. It can be pen testing of web apps, or external perimeter, internal security assessments on systems that are critical and things like that. If you've done those kinds of things, you are probably ready for a go at red teaming. But one of the most common questions I get is, where should we start if we're not doing any offensive security? And also, what does good offensive security coverage look like? And is what we're doing enough? And, we're really, really well situated to answer that because we see all sorts of different environments and different approaches to offensive security. But at the same time, the big caveat here is consider a company whose only purpose is to build a mobile game where they're not collecting PII, they're not collecting payment card information, they're just a game, right? Versus a multinational bank or a critical energy, like a nuclear power plant or something, right? On the opposite end of that. How can you possibly define what good looks like for all cases? You just can't. So, that said, there is an order of operations, like in math, right? Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. There is a great general order of operations. And sometimes companies go out of order, like that example I mentioned previously, and it's suboptimal for them. They could use their money and time much more valuable and elsewhere. But as you can see here, we've got foundational, this is the bedrock type of things of security practices. You should be doing basic threat modeling, security reviews of things. I'd start to look at attack surface management and making sure you have a vuln management and application security program testing happening within your organization. With that foundational element, you then can move into more advanced testing. This is your various forms of pen testing across network, cloud applications. And after that point, then you can kind of bridge into adversary emulation, which includes the red teaming, purple teaming, and tabletop exercises there. So generally, we advise that you strengthen level 1 before you go to level 2, level 2 before you go to level 3, or you can just, as my teenager says, I just like to YOLO it while she's driving, which is very scary to me, but you can learn a lot from that as well. It just might not be the best approach for you. So, so that is that. And then In terms of, again, I'm going to say a second time, repeat that caveat. This is different for everybody, right? Every company is different in their risk posture. Not all companies require advanced at all. But this is what I see from my vantage as I work with hundreds of different companies that are all doing different kinds of offensive security there. Generally, their starting point is whatever is required from compliance related testing. So that's table stakes. You got to start there. You don't want to incur fines from your regulatory bodies and that type of a thing. That is meeting the minimum bar for testing, and it's not necessarily advanced or above and beyond. It's just checking the box for compliance, really. So minimal means doing about a once per year pen test in that environment, either part of that minimum required, or if your compliance only requires something like your PCI environment, then there's usually a separate pen testing effort that's covering more than just your payment card environment there. So that's your entry point. That's what gets you started on the path there. And there's this giant bucket of everybody else, right? It's again a bell curve. So the middle, this baseline is what we see most often of. You'll start to increase the cadence of that pen testing because networks change and evolve, and there are new technologies that are introduced. So something more like 2x network pen testing per year, and then they start to introduce a very targeted testing, pen testing and security assessment around key critical systems. So either that's like post-deployment after you've deployed or gone through a major upgrade to something, or periodically, like every other year. I call these crown jewel assessments. And say you consider your Active Directory, your MFA environments to be critical to you. If they go down, they can impact production, they can impact business. And so that's a couple. Maybe your customer repository, your online customer portal, that's like 4 crown jewels right there, right? So for critical system assessment to be feasible, tenable, doable, that crown jewel list has to be something in like the 20s or 30s and no more than that. Anything more than that, and it just becomes overwhelming amount of work to do pen testing on that on a regular basis there. But that can make sure that your testing efforts are on the things that are most important to you. And so then you get to you get to advanced offensive security there on the right-hand side. Again, this is large retailers, these are banks, this is what you can aspire to, but don't necessarily need to hit. But for these organizations, point in time pen testing is not enough. It's not adequate. You can't wait up to 6 months to find a critical vulnerability or to know that there's a critical vulnerability on your perimeter. So they go to continuous on that through services like external pen testing through attack surface management like Cosmos, for example, or bug bounty types of programs, or just regular testing of that perimeter there. So that's a dedicated team that's looking through your perimeter throughout the year, staying on top of 0 days and new vulnerabilities and things. So when the next log4j or log5j or whatever hits, we've got your back. We can tell you where you're vulnerable. Hey, there's 20 systems here. 10 of them are actually false positives. These are the ones where we verified that you're vulnerable, and we can get you right off to the races in terms of fixing that in your environment. A little further down, you'll see companies starting to get a little bit more granular with your red teams. Let's say you're at a major bank, you have your online banking portal, you've got your retail banks with ATMs out in the field, as well as physical locations. You have mortgages in your line of business. You have a shared banking tech environment, and you have all sorts of other like wire payment processing infrastructure and things. Is a once per year red team going to be adequate to hit kind of all of the scenarios with different attacker motivations? There's no way. You could try to. You're going to muddy the waters so much that you lose any sense of any kind of narrative there. So generally, these advanced companies are looking for multiple red teams to try to get very specific localized scenarios for different lines of business scenarios that they're concerned about. One thing I recommend here is if you consider your crown jewel systems, again, try to stick with like 20, right? 20 crown jewel systems. What are your top 5 threats? and what are your top 5 threat actors. And you could plan maybe 3 or 4 red team scenarios over the next 24 months that kind of carve out one or more of those within that list. Maybe one of your red team scenarios takes 2 of your threat scenarios, supply chain and ransomware. It takes maybe 3 of your top threat actors who are all ransomware threat actors, and maybe you can carve out like 7 of your key crown jewels and incorporate that into one red team. And now you can maybe do the rest of that and get full coverage of all of that. I call it 5-5-20X. It's kind of like P90X, but it's way cooler. But so your 5 is your 5 top threats. Your other 5 is your top 5 threat actors. Your 20 is your 20 crown jewels. And your X is, as I mentioned, your different lines of business. It speaks to the complexity of your business. A retailer, a major online retailer, is going to have, maybe 10, 15, 20, different lines of business. And that's why they go and have 6, 7, 8 internal red teams that kind of look at different aspects of that. So do that 5-5-20X. Your boards, your CISOs are going to love you when they see that nice all green, hey, we got all of our 5 threats, all of our 5 threat actors, all of our 20 crown jewels, and we've hit every single line of business in the last 24 months or something. That's strategic, right? With offensive security. So now most of my career has actually been spent building and leading internal red teams. It's only in the last 4 years that I've actually been with an offensive security firm. So I've lived in both environments. Both are beautiful in their own way. Which one should you do? Should you build your own internal red team? Should you go through third-party services for that? And it's not a simple answer. There are definite advantages to buy. I was actually surprised when I did this math. I figured there might be, at certain points of scale, it may be more beneficial cost-wise to build internally. But if you consider fully loaded cost of headcount, the labs and tooling, the licenses you're going to need for C2 platforms or different services like Shodan and other types of things, your hosting costs and things like that, your build costs are always more than what you can get through an offensive security firm. We can always do it cheaper, right? But that's not the only factor. Also going through a firm, we can give you a fresh, independent, unbiased perspective. We can give you a depth of skills and expertise. For example, if you think about it, you may only want one physical red team every 3 years. But typically, practitioners in red teaming that are really good in physical are usually just good in physical, right? And or maybe social engineering or maybe some basic other types of things. So would it make sense if you're building your own to have a red teamer that's only physical? Probably not, because you're not going to utilize those skill sets very often. Whereas I have a team of like almost 20 people, 20 red teamers, and we get physicals all the time. We get socials all the time. So I can afford to have people on my staff that are deep, narrow expertise in very specific areas, and I can kind of pair them together to meet whatever needs you've got there. So one of the advantages of buy is that we also have experience across a variety of different environments. We can utilize that experience to benefit you. Compliance mandates sometimes say, like DORA, they say you need a third-party provider once every so often, that type of a thing. So that's one of the benefits of buy. But build, there's all sorts of strong factors as well. All of that learnings, all of that institutional knowledge you gain from your red team with a build stays with your red teamers. You're going to get that knowledge retention, and it stays with your company. You're going to also have an enormous amount of flexibility and adaptability. So, for example, let's say you get a week before you're going to execute that operation, and your CISO says, "Cut! I don't want you to do this one. I want you to do that other one." With a third-party firm, it's a little more difficult for us to pivot. We've got a SOW in place. We've already got resources lined up. Whereas with an internal team, you've got a lot of flexibility to say, let's push it by a week. Let's push it by 3 weeks, that kind of a thing. If you have a red team in-house, you get strong collaboration with that blue team. And that team is exclusively focused on your environment. So some strong, one way or the other, your mileage is going to dictate one way or the other. However, you actually can do a blended approach very successfully. In fact, we do this all the time. You can, in fact, most of the large organizations, the big online retailers, the big banks, they have their own red teams Not only that, they have like 5 internal red teams, and they still will come to us for various targeted reasons. So you can still get some cost effectiveness, cost efficiency to be able to help. Maybe their teams only have time for these 12 exercises, and then they have 2 stretch goals. Hey, let's have Bishop Fox look at that, right? We can take on any excess. We also can provide unbiased perspectives, fresh perspectives on things. Maybe the red team is done. They've already kind of done an exercise. They'd like a second set of eyes on that. So we can help that. We can augment teams. Maybe in that case where the red team internally has an exercise that has some physical elements, but they don't have a physical person. So we can take on that for them. Or maybe it's about deep fake. We can contribute expertise to participate on your exercises through ride-alongs, and we can share knowledge as we do it. So this goes really, really well for us. We really enjoy, and for you guys, I meant even more so. There's knowledge transfer. You get skill sets where you might not have that immediately, and that type of a thing. And you can also satisfy regulatory and compliance needs there. So key questions, right? So for guiding red team operations. Now, if you're assuming you're ready to go with a red team operation, it's good for you to sit down and have answers to certain questions before you start to talk with your red team. Number one is just around what are the desired goals and outcomes? What attack goals? What are the crown jewels that you're wanting us to incorporate in? What are the threats and adversaries? What are the scenarios? Is this ransomware? Is this a malicious insider, a bad developer putting in backdoors into code? Whatever that is, if you have a general idea, we can walk down that path with you and make some great suggestions there. Scope, you want to know about what time frame. Do you have a push to get something in Q4? That's usually the busiest time for all offensive security firms. So if you have a time frame that's in Q2, Q1, those firms are usually going to be able to put their best on that project for you. And you won't have conflicts around resources. Do you want to do zero knowledge, partial knowledge, full knowledge? Does your SOC, do you want to let your SOC know what's happening or not? Or do you want to test them with zero knowledge? Do you want this to be external facing red team, or do you want to start from a vantage inside? So what we call assumed breach. So assuming there was a vulnerability on your perimeter in your DMZ, right, on a host in your DMZ, or assuming somebody clicked on a link that they shouldn't, and now we start from an end user machine. Those are the types of things you're going to want to know around scope. And then we've got your trusted insider group. Who is that, right? So your trusted insider group is a group of people that's going to be read into the operation, that's going to be knowledgeable about the day-to-day what's happening, and they're going to keep it under wraps. Why spend all this money if any of these folks are going to go out and blab it and try to cheat, or help somebody give a benefit of a doubt, and you're not going to get the ground truth that you wanted. So you need to it goes without saying, you need to fully trust your trusted insider group. Usually this is your CISO. You don't want to do a red team without your CISO's awareness. It's happened before. A SOC leader usually, or a POC, again, there's that temptation to say, hey, you might want to look at, these types of attacks today, but that's really undermining the effectiveness and value of the engagement. And then you're going to want an offensive security leader involved in your TIG. Now, sometimes there's conditional needs to have certain individuals involved in a red team. Let's say you're heavily emphasizing a particular line of business, like the mortgages side of that bank that I was telling you about. You're probably going to want to involve someone, a leader at that level, who can keep things under wraps. Let's say you're doing an operation that involves building compromise. You're actually going to be, sneaking in after hours. You're going to want to make sure that your building owner, the landlord, for example, as well as your physical security leader, is aware of that happening at that time, so you can prevent any unwanted escalations. If you're performing an insider threat type of simulation, you may want somebody from your insider threat team who can see what's happening behind the scenes with that defending team, or your HR involved in that. And let's say you're going to be heavily in your Azure or AWS or Google Cloud environment. You may want an SME in your trusted insider group who's not going to spill the beans. And then you've got rules of engagement. Every red team should have a rules of engagement. You can kind of think ahead of like what could go wrong, right? And you could kind of vet that through your legal teams and make sure, we make sure we're doing this and not violating any kind of local laws and things. What are the right hours of execution when you should allow red teams to be on site? How will you get your initial access? How often is the TIG communicating? And then via what means? Is that through Slack? Is that through Teams? Is that through Signal or whatever? And then there needs to be a deconfliction process to allow, let's say there is a detection and you're trying to figure out, is this the red team or not? That's when the TIG gets invoked, and you can kind of make decisions that will allow the red team to still result in a positive outcome and produce a lot of value while still kind of satisfying that blue team piece there. Also, if you're doing physicals, you probably want legal letters that they can have, with ink signatures that say these people are authorized to do this engagement. Don't throw them in jail or report them to law enforcement. With the time remaining, I'm just going to quickly cover, these are the 5 mistakes that attackers love to exploit in your environment. Usually when a red team has been significantly successful in an environment, it's because of these 5 things. So if you think about your environment from these 5 standpoints here, shore these up, you might fare pretty well on a red team engagement. So the first of these is improper secrets management. People store credentials in Excel spreadsheets, in local files. They store them in Confluence and, places they should never be, and SharePoint and things. Red teams love to find these, and sometimes that can mean the difference between failure and success on an engagement. Excessive user privileges. Too many users are running with scissors and, with too much privilege, and therefore when they execute something, it's with the privileges of an administrator, or they can do a lot of things in your environment. So having kind of proper identity and dropping, privileges of normal users and, kind of following these privileges as much as possible goes a long way. Proper network segmentation. It is way too often that we gain access to one part of the environment, and then we have free reign of the inside network. We can get to your OT environments. We can get to your DMZ, your server environment, everything, right? Back and forth, and very little preventing us. Usually, often networks are built for accessibility and not so much for security. Red teams use that to their advantage. Inadequate controls around social engineering tactics. Is security awareness ever something that will reach, or susceptibility to phishing or social engineering ever something that will reach a 0? No, you will always have people that will make bad decisions. And so the emphasis is, yes, you do want to do security awareness training, but also you want to provide a proper safety net around when people do click on the bad things, then what happens? Or do you have DNS sinkholing? Do you have sandboxing of executables when they're detonated and those types of things? Do you have URL filtering and those types of things that are happening? That's usually a big failure that we're able to exploit. And lastly, poor or default security detections. If you think about like an EDR product, like let's say CrowdStrike, right? Well, attackers have access to CrowdStrike, right? They can test and see in their own lab environments, if I do this, will this be detected? Okay, it is. I'm not going to do that against my real target environment, right? But what they don't have is visibility into anything, any custom business logic that you have baked in to your security detections. And therefore, to the extent that you do that, for example, somebody in Singapore accessing a machine over in Phoenix, that should never happen because, the systems are available in Singapore, right? That can trigger some helpful alerting that will catch your attackers by surprise there. So that is, I'm right at the top of the hour here, but I did want to point you to, we can also go over some QA here, but I also, before we do that, wanted to go over some additional resources that you can access. There's a how-to guide for red teaming. We also have a ransomware readiness ebook, and then we have a video as well on our website around tabletop exercises and red teaming for incident response. Let me see if I can get into these questions here. Here's Q&A. Okay, so we've got one here around, what would you say to someone who is interested in red teaming but is not sure how to make a career out of it? Oh, wow. Red teamers come from all sorts of different professions. I've seen great red teamers come out of detection and response, and they come in with that beautiful expertise and wisdom around what a defender would do, and we can take that. I would caution when you do that, though. Sometimes, in my experience, people coming from the blue team side tend to be rule followers, right? Of course, we need to follow rules as red teams, but not from a standpoint of access on the network. They're literally paying us in order to find ways that an attacker could do certain things. So I would say combine that. I would say some of the key areas is system exploitation, understand Windows and or Linux, OS X, try to understand that at a fundamental level. Pick up a coding language, whether that's Go or Python, or something where you can learn to code, because often you're not going to have a tool for that job, and often it just requires kind of developing your own. Understanding networks, those types of things are really helpful. Get yourself into vulnerable hacking labs like Hack the Box and things like that, and just have fun with it. And if it's something you truly enjoy doing, then yeah, you just might have a future in it. I'd say pen testing can be a great stepping stone into red teaming. Typically, we're looking for somebody with a few years experience of doing that. Let's see, isn't there a problem? Another question, that was a good question. Thank you for that, Sender. And then Bill asked, isn't there a problem that if you achieve the objective using one path, other paths are not discovered? If you achieve the objective using one path, other paths are not discovered. Yeah, so I think I understand what we're saying here, and that is sometimes we may just want to go vertical and try to reach the path, and then we're done, right? But a good red teamer goes backwards and says, okay, that one's done. We fully fleshed that out. Now let's look at 3, 4, 5, 6 other ways that we can do that. That's really a benefit to the customer. Otherwise, we're going to do that red team. We're going to come back next time and we're going to get in again. And they're going to be like, what? I followed all of your recommendations and I'm still in the same type of approach there. So we really try to emphasize with our team that, okay, yes, you reached the trophy target. Do it again, not using that attack or technique there. So hopefully that was what you were asking there. How do you approach phishing resistant mature organizations that use things like YubiKeys and FastPass? Very carefully. We love to see that in our environments. I'd say phishing resistance authentication is one of those things that falls under that safety net, right? So yeah, typically we're going to default back to other types of social engineering to try to get like someone to insert a YubiKey or to do a multi-factor type of a thing there. So yeah, very carefully, I would say they do very, very well. Phishing resistant authentication is an excellent control to have. So we might also look for just different attack paths on a perimeter, look for perimeter vulnerabilities and things like that. Another question here. I'm a young offensive security engineer. What's the key to success in your opinion? I was chosen for the national team to compete in the European cybersecurity. That's amazing. Very cool. I'm proud to know you. Yeah, I would say, oh, geez, these are moving up so fast. I'm not seeing your prior questions there. I think it was success criteria. Now that I can't see the question anymore, but I would say grit, sticking with problems. Albert Einstein said, it's not that I'm smarter than anybody else. He was, but I just stick with problems for longer, right? That was his perspective of it, is he just stuck with problems for longer. All too often people will give up on a certain approach when they've tried a few things and it just kind of hits your psyche a little too much. But the biggest success criteria is you stick with problems for longer, just like Einstein does. Let's see. Okay, here's another good question here. Seems like a big jump to go from pen testing to red teaming. Is there a way to do a small scale red team to start out? Absolutely. So good question. And I'm going to go back, sorry for all of the screen. Okay, so right here on this one here, I show the stair steps, right? Foundational, advanced, and adversary emulation. In fact, probably the biggest concern with this is like, man, it sure seems like a big jump. I think if I were to reorder this image, I'd make the foundational advanced really low, and then adversary emulation is a bit of a leap of faith there. But yes, so many have that concern that we actually came up with an additional service, and it's called adversary controls testing. And it's kind of a hybrid between a purple team and a red team, wherein we look at 3 critical control areas of your organization: endpoint and network and email. Okay, and then there's a static set of tests that we will do that will give you not only individualized test results, but it will also give you an overall control score for that control area. So you may score above average on your endpoint, you may score average on your network, and you may score below average on your email security controls, right, as a result of that. And then 6 months down the road, 12 months down, you can do it again. This is a very cost-effective baby step in between pen testing and adversary emulation. So that's a great one. A good question. Let's see here. What are your thoughts regarding who all in an organization can control or influence the scope of red team operations? For example, do you see a best practice as keeping only a CISO involved or others? Oh, this is a beautiful question. Thank you for that. One thing, like if you're going to build your own red team or work with third-party services, always allow that function to be planned and proactive as opposed to reactive and requestable. In some of my prior red teams that I inherited, they were entirely requestable. So anybody could go and say, I'd like a red team and I'd like for you to do this, right? Meanwhile, we had this really, really good idea from our threat intelligence team of, that would really hit to the core of our business, right? But because it was requestable, it came from an executive over here. We had to drop everything and do that one, even though it was like a very low risk, comparatively speaking. So what I recommend is that red teams, whether it's, again, bought or built, go through an annual process to say, what are all the themes? Again, we did the 5-5-20X, right? That can be a great basis for your planning. And then you can result in say, okay, I can cover that. It's like name that tune. I can cover that in 4 key exercises. And then you can then kind of plan out those operations and execute on them. Well, those exercises, the planning exercise isn't done in a bubble. You are seeking input from different line of business leaders. You can even have an interview with each line of business stakeholder, like 4 or 5. If you say you have 5 different lines of business, each one has kind of a key leader, asking them for ideas as to what's your nightmare scenario that we can play out for you and help you get better at, right? Then that leads into your annual planning. You do a ranking and vetting and scoring, and then that goes to the CISO, and the CISO says, yeah, this looks great. Or, yeah, this 4th one, I don't want you to do, swap it out with this one instead. And therefore, you have something that is considered a variety of inputs and has been approved by your security leadership there. Great. I think that's all our questions there. Education background in CIS with compliance audit experience. How can I make the transition to red teaming? Okay, so the key thing when you've got a background in audit, you are likely going to be following more of a script. You're going to be holistically checking all the things. Of course, you do some sampling in audit, but one big thing about red teaming is, it's like Bruce Lee said, is like water, my friend. You're going to be in an environment and you're going to adapt. You're going to really try to navigate based on that. So try to get into things like the vulnerable hacking labs I mentioned. Try to get some education in actual exploitation, and realize that every environment, it's like Mike Tyson says, I'm using a lot of quotes here, but everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. Well, that environment is the punch in the face, because a lot of times it's like, okay, I'm excited about this environment. I'm going to do all these 20 things, and very few of them are actually feasible in the environment. The adaptability, the being able to pivot in different ways is super, super key to being a red teamer there. So just read that book. Wow, very cool. So this has covered a lot of ground. Hopefully you're not like swimming, and hopefully this was beneficial. I would love for you to reach out to me if you have any additional questions. Always happy to talk red teaming with folks, and to talk you through challenges maybe you're facing in that space. I love to do that with folks, so please reach out to me on social media. Also click on those links, the references, if you have additional information. And other than that, I hope this was super valuable for you, and hope you have a great day.